Well, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
The first horror movie that I ever saw was a film from the 1940s. Maybe you've heard of it, Pinocchio. Right? You think this isn't a terrifying movie. Friends, do you remember Pinocchio? Do you remember Pinocchio? Yes. Stromboli in the beginning, right? This psychopathic puppeteer who wants to turn Pinocchio into firewood. That's in the beginning. The middle, anybody remember Pleasure Island? What happens in Pleasure Island, right? Boys turn into donkeys and are sold overseas into slavery. That's the middle. The end of the movie, who's Monstro, right? Who didn't get in the water for a really long time because of Monstro. Remember this whale that tries to eat Pinocchio, right? Why do we show these movies to children, right? Why do we show movies to children, period? Because every movie that I've ever seen, even ones designed for kids, have something absolutely terrifying in them. Just by a show of hands. We're just going to do Disney for a minute. Raise your hand if there has been a Disney movie in your life that has kept you up for longer than you would like to be. Fantastic, hands down. For those of you who couldn't see on live stream, basically every person's hand was up. Disney is in the business of terrifying children, right? And this, by the way, I want to be equal opportunity here, and I don't want to get an email from a Disney lawyer. This is every movie. The longer the movie is, the more likely it is it's going to have something that will scare the pants off of you, no matter how old you are. Which is why my wife and we don't let our kids watch movies. They are almost 9 and 7. And I think over the...
Wildcrats.
They watch Wildcrats, but they've seen, I think, 3 movies in their life. And each movie that they've seen has resulted in less sleep for us. So we just skip movies entirely as a family. It works out better for everyone. Now, unfortunately, as a rabbi, you can't skip the scary stuff. And when you get to this week's Parsha, as Rabbi Shmelkin knows, this week's Parsha is as scary as it gets. This week's Parsha, Parshat Korach, has 3 chapters, and I want you to just remember what each chapter is. There are 2 terrifying chapters. Numbers chapters 16 and 17. What are the scary chapters? 16 and 17, remember that. Because chapters 16 and 17, the entire story falls apart. You have a man named Korach who rises up and stages a rebellion against Moses. Just a twist of the knife. He's actually Moses' cousin, of all people. You thought you had family drama. You know nothing on Moses. Moses' cousin Korach stages a rebellion, and it's Korach and a couple of other people and 250 elders of Israel. They rise up against Moses, and just in the nick of time, talk about scary, the ground underneath Korach and crew's feet opens up beneath them, and they fall into an eternal abyss. That's how Numbers chapter 16 ends. But then we have a sequel, Numbers chapter 17, which is even scarier than 16 because it's not Korach and 250 guys who come against Moses and Aaron. It is the entire community of Israel. And so I want you to imagine for a minute, you're not just observing the story as a viewer. You are Moses and Aaron. And all of a sudden, you have 1.2 million people coming at you, saying, "You have brought death upon us." So what do Moses and Aaron do? They back away. They go back as far as they could. I thought I'd have a podium tonight. It's going to have my back to it, right? And it's them, the 2 of them, and the entire nation of Israel against them. And in this moment of absolute darkness, I want you to get in that headspace, by the way. You're Moses and Aaron. You've got 1 million people coming at you. God speaks from the tent of meeting right behind them and says, "Stand back," God says. "Stand back that I might annihilate these people. Stand back that I might begin a new story with you." In this moment of darkness, God gives Moses and Aaron an offer they couldn't refuse. And so what do Moses and Aaron do? No. Instead of standing back, they run forward. Actually, Aaron does this, my namesake, which makes me really proud. Aaron stands in between with his fire pan, in between this oncoming plague and the Israelites, standing literally between death and life. They stop the plague. So why do Moses and Aaron turn down God's offer? Especially in this moment of darkness, especially in this moment of everything they knew and loved unraveling in front of them. why do Aaron and Moses turn this down? And I wouldn't blame them, by the way, for taking God up on God's offer. This is a terrible moment. This is a dark chapter. This is a moment when any of us, if we didn't have a minute to think, would cut and run. So why, again, do Moses and Aaron not take God up on God's offer to begin anew? Now, to help answer this question, and just to unpack it a little bit, anyone who's been a part of any story long enough, to go back to the movie metaphor for a minute, has experienced a dark chapter or two in that story. Anyone who's been in a story long enough knows that darkness comes eventually. Now, you might not think it's going to happen to you, and I remember when Lauren and I, my wife, before we had kids, we would look at, and we were judgy, and I'm sorry, we would look at parents with young children at restaurants. Does anybody here do this? And you look at these parents with the kids at the restaurants, and the kids are throwing potatoes at each other, and one kid's pulling the tablecloth and screaming at the server and screaming at the parents, and the parents are saying, shh, you're in public, you can't, shh, quiet. And Lauren and I, we were so judgy. We would say, we would never do that with our sweet angels of children. We would never do that. We would get on their level, and we would understand them. We would try to see what's happening in their heads that they're not able to express because their language isn't fully developed. We would be with them on that level, and they would never do that to us, by the way, because we would be so compassionate and can't even say it with a straight face, so compassionate and understanding when we're parents. And sure enough, friends, I hope you've never seen my family and me at a restaurant. Because your kids will betray you, and you will betray them. And this is the same whether or not you have kids. It's the same for your spouse. It's the same for dear friends. It's the same for colleagues who you love and for workplaces that you care about. It's not a matter of if, but when that dark chapter is going to come. And sometimes it's going to be just a day, and sometimes it's going to be just a dinner. But sometimes it's going to be a week, or a month, or a dark year, or maybe even more. The question becomes, what happens, and what do you do when that dark chapter, not if, but when, that dark chapter arises? So I'll tell you what not to do. I'll tell you what not to do, because this is not me telling you what not to do. This is God telling the prophet Elijah what not. You know Elijah? Elijah from the Passover story, that one of the greatest prophets, our sages teach the greatest prophet since Moses. Right? The greatest prophet since Moses is having an equally bad time with the children of Israel. This is about 1,000 years later. The prophet Elijah has an evil king and queen. The nation of Israel is turned against him. There are all these false prophets running around, and everything he knows and loves has unraveled in front of him. And so what does Elijah do? I'm not going to leave, but that's what he does. Elijah runs, and he runs into the wilderness as far as his legs can carry him. And in the middle of the wilderness, God speaks to Elijah and says, "Why are you here? Why are you here?" And Elijah gets himself all worked up. Elijah says, well, and I'm paraphrasing again, the king is terrible, and the queen is worse, and the Israelites have turned against me, and all the prophets are false and leading the people in the wrong direction. It's just me. I'm the last righteous guy left. God, it's just me and you. And God says, why are you here? And Elijah does the whole song and dance again. The king is bad. The queen is worse. The people are turning against me. Everything is falling apart. It's just me. I'm the last righteous guy left. God, it's just you and me. And God says, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't need you. They do. I don't need you. God says, go back, God says. Go back to a people that needs you. Go back to Israel. I don't need you, but they do. What do you do when the darkness comes? You go to where you are needed. God is what sends you back. And so we had chapters 16 and 17. Those are our dark chapters in this 3-chapter Parshat Korach. What about chapter 18? Chapter 18 is almost a non sequitur, and you're not going to believe me when I say this, because we go from this high drama, this terrifying movie of a parsha, to a chapter of a commandment, all revolving around what's called first fruits. You know, you've heard me talk about first fruits before, but for those of you who don't remember, the commandment of first fruits is based on this premise that back in an agricultural society, the first of what you grew The best of your flock, the best of your produce, you would take and you would give away to a cause, to a people that was bigger than you. You would take the best of what you have and you would give it away. That's the premise of first fruits. Take the best of what you have and give it to something bigger. And what the underlying message in this Parsha, this 3-chapter Parsha, is that there are moments of darkness, sometimes more than we'd wish there would be. And there is something that you can do. There are moments of darkness, but there's always something that you can do. Now, I don't care on this 4th of July. I care, but there are people on the right in this room. There are people on the left in this room. And there are people on the right who are watching it on the left too. But the one thing that the left and the right both have in common right now in this moment in our nation's story is that we are absolutely terrified for what comes next. Can we agree on that? We're absolutely terrified for what comes next. And I'm telling you, every time you get that phone out of your pocket and you check what's going on in the world, it will just make that anxiety spike a little bit higher, raise that cortisol a little bit more. Every time you hear a new story, every time you read a new something that's happening just down the street from us, because we're in Washington, D.C., this place feels like it is unraveling. And remember, there's always something you can do, because the opposite of anxiety, especially on this 4th of July Shabbat, this 5th of July Shabbat, the opposite of anxiety is agency. The opposite of anxiety is agency, and that's the foundation of this country that we live in today. That is the foundation of this home that we've been a part of since the day that we were born. The opposite of anxiety is agency. And so I want to go back for just a moment as we wrap up to an anxious time in our nation's story. 1790, when George Washington was president, and the Jewish community of Rhode Island wrote to George Washington. Some of you are familiar with this letter. It's widely cited, including in the musical Hamilton, widely cited as one of the most important pieces of Americana. The Jews of Rhode Island wrote to George Washington, and they had, I'm going to paraphrase, they had a question. And their question was essentially, is our experience here in America going to be like it was in Europe? Are we going to be subject to the humiliations, the persecutions, the torments that we experience in Europe? Will that happen here? And this letter has been widely cited, quoted, and I never paid attention to the last line. The very last line of George Washington's response to the Jewish community of Rhode Island, I'm going to read this here, is that God might make all of us in our several vocations useful here. I'm going to read that one more time because it's not how we normally speak today. A prayer that God makes all of us in our several vocations useful here. That you and I are useful here. That you and I have a purpose here. That you and I have a function here. That there's something you can do here in this place as it feels like things are falling apart. As it feels like things are unraveling underneath your feet. As it feels like this country, no matter whether you're on the left or the right, is going in the wrong direction. There is something you can do. And so every time you are feeling anxious, every time you read a story that just keeps you up at night, and there were many this past week for me, there's something you can do. You have agency. There's something you can do. Our rabbis teach that every Jew was put here today to do a mitzvah. And so when that anxiety rises, the question is not what are you worried about. The question that makes us Jews and the question that makes us Americans is what's going to be your mitzvah. What is your mitzvah in response to anxiety? This is how our country was built. This is how our country has sustained itself for 200, almost 50 years, right? This is how we've gotten this far. Because in moments of anxiety, we ask that question, what can we do? There's no more important question for us as Americans. And there's no more important question on this Shabbat of the 4th of July for us as Jews. Shabbat Shalom. Good Shabbos. Good Shabbos.